Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 7 of The Familiar of Zero. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, Saito and company managed to recover the Staff of Destruction, but in so doing, they revealed that it was in fact a weapon from Earth, a missile launcher. And despite everything, despite their rocky relationship, Saito and Louise sort of had a good time at the ball afterwards. So it seems they are being rewarded for their part in all this. Louise has been granted a title, namely Chevalier, which is, I guess, like knighthood, essentially. And for better or for worse, Princess Henrietta is also thanking Saito, which, it seems like it's sort of a breach of protocol, but I don't know, take it for what you will. Henrietta seems to be not necessarily bound by all the duties of her office as strictly as perhaps she might be. Unfortunately, Saito is also not really bound by everything, He doesn't really understand all the social aspects that go into a meeting like this, and unfortunately, Louise is just sort of assuming here that he knows what he should be doing. Given that this is Saito, I think it's fair to say he's had a little lapse in judgment here. It's never a good thing when you just go and kiss the princess. Oh dear, it seems as though Saito might have created his own incident. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. Now, with a title like The Part-Time Job for Louise, I can only assume she is forced to take a part-time job to make the money for reparations for the princess after this incident, but, I think I sort of suspect that that's not the case. Unfortunately, or rather, fortunately, Princess Henrietta is understanding. Unfortunately, however, Saito was foolish enough to say, hey, I'm the type of idiot that would make this mistake. Now, apologizing's all well and good, but maybe Louise is taking things a bit too far, saying that, she'd take a long walk off a short pier if the princess gave the order. And, I get it, I'd probably want to take a toaster bath too were I involved, but, when you are a titled aristocrat, sometimes the best thing you can do is live for the realm, So, it seems as though Princess Henrietta has something more in store for them, seeing as how Louise has ditched her school uniform and is ostensibly trying to dress more like a peasant. Given that we see the princess handing off identifying documents, it seems to me that Louise will be going undercover. Now, this is interesting in many ways, because what I've been given to understand about The Familiar of Zero is that it's essentially pre-revolution France, And Henrietta here is concerned that the various aristocrats are oppressing the peasants unduly, which, it speaks to her character that she is concerned about it, or at least appears to care. Being concerned and caring are not necessarily the same thing. From her perspective as the ruler, you do want to tend to the peasants somewhat, just because if they get really unhappy about things, then things start getting messy. So, you do have to take care of them. And it seems as though she's caring sincerely, to her credit. But it is interesting that she's sending Louise, of all people, to do this. In no small part because Louise doesn't seem to be the type of person to, blend in, for want of a better term. Saito's done it before. Just by, insinuating that she's flat as a pancake, she, responds with aggression. I can only assume that many other people, assuming she's also a peasant, would slight her similarly to, dramatic effect, I imagine. So, I guess it speaks to the desperation of Princess Henrietta that she would have to rely on Louise, which isn't to say that Louise is remarkably unreliable, but it seems as though she can't count on her own court, which is not good. Now, speaking of not good, Louise is not as worldly as some people, She was given money. That money was not enough for the 5-star hotel, so she tried to make money at the casino, and the results were predictable. So, understandably, she doesn't want to go back to the princess saying, hey, I squandered all that money playing blackjack, but, man. So if things were bad before, things are really, really bad now, because they have no shelter, they have no food, they have no money. Oh dear. So it seems as though this proprietor here has taken a liking to them, but, I don't know. I feel for matters of personal safety, this guy should not be trusted. Now it is rather notable, I guess, that really Saito's the one in danger here, but Louise... Well, no, I take that back. Things are sort of going the opposite way. Louise is the one being put to work here, but I assumed she would be willing to take, any shelter she could get. Now, I see where things are going here. This guy runs an inn. The inn has a bunch of buxom waitresses, and naturally, Louise is going to be a waitress, but, she kind of stands out in an unfortunate way. So the question is, approximately how many minutes will it take before this becomes an issue? I'm willing to bet 5 minutes tops. Now, it is interesting that their cover story is that Louise and Saito are brother and sister and that they've fled here. Louise doesn't exactly have the countenance of, a sister who would flee. Even as she introduces herself, she is highly annoyed at everything, and really, that's only going to continue. Now, unfortunately for Saito, he's working in the kitchen as a dishwasher, and Jessica, his co-worker, has, assumed his name is very bizarre, and that, she's already just sort of suspicious of this whole arrangement, She sort of tells him with a wink that he's got a very cute sister, which indicates to me she's kind of assumed that they're not actually related. So here's the crux of the episode. A tip race. The idea being that all the waitresses are now competing to get the most money in tips, and should they win, they get a neat little outfit, which would presumably help them collect more tips. I mean, when you get down to it, the garment isn't that much different from what they're already wearing, but allegedly, it's magical, so, Yeah, I guess this is really catching Louise's ear. You know, the idea being that it would help you make all the money you want. And given that she was short on money to begin with and squandered what little she had, you know, money is kind of in high demand. Now, naturally, Louise is making a bit of a mistake here. She assumes that this is going to be an easy thing. You know, she can just, like, do it and earn money, but, you know, between the way that she's not really trained to be a waitress and the way she sort of speaks stiltedly, you know, that's not exactly conducive to getting much money in the way of tips, you know? Especially because I get the feeling that, like, the way tips work here, they're much more like how they should be, in the sense that you give tips for exemplary service rather than it being an expectation. Yeah, so here we go. Inside of 5 minutes, a customer's already been sorta rude. Not necessarily without warrant, but Louise is now making things worse. So to the boss's credit, you know, he's sticking up for her a little bit, saying like, look, you'll have to forgive Louise. She's new here. She doesn't know everything yet. But at the same time, he's not exactly letting her off the hook either. He says, you know, hey, you know, bring this guy a napkin. And there will probably be some talk about this later. Well, I guess if there is to be talk later, we're not hearing it now. Unfortunately, the other big spot of trouble is that there is only one bed that they have to share. Now, that might be bad enough if you're brother and sister. Like, I imagine siblings past a point really don't want to sleep with one another. But for Louise in particular, this is tantamount to sleeping next to an animal, which, you know, you do it if you have to, but it's still not great. At least Saito has the good sense to, you know, not push the issue and opt to sleep on the floor. You know, that doesn't really make Louise that much happier, but at least it sort of forestalls another problem. You know, he's not normally the type to do things like that, to be overly conciliatory. You know, according to my memory, like, more often than not, he tends to make an issue where there needn't be one. Now, tellingly, as Saito snoozes away, Louise is wondering that, like, despite wearing this outfit that she is, Saito isn't even making a move on her. And, you know, that sort of belies the point that she kinda does want him to, inwardly, if not outwardly. Now, Louise is just suffering. Like, I've had bats in my house before, and they are nasty critters, man. So I don't blame Louise for cuddling up next to Saito at the prospect of having to deal with bats. Now, unfortunately for her, the second day on the job is not much better than the first. You know, she's dumped wine over one patron's head for calling her flat, and she's slapped another one for appreciating her a little too much for being flat. So, you know, something tells me she's gonna get like a whole big fat 0 for, you know, total tips, which it's probably not great. I don't imagine she's gonna get much in the way of a base wage here. At least the boss is understanding, you know, he's saying like, look, stand here and watch the other waitresses and, you know, see what they do so you can imitate them. He's not exactly reading her the riot act just yet, but like, I don't know. I used to work at a restaurant, and I feel like if I had spilled something on a customer deliberately or slapped a customer, you know, I would be in real trouble, you know? Like, I get this isn't exactly real life and all that. Well, you know, considering Louise got away with, like, hurling a bottle at Saito's head, you know, I feel like she's being given considerable leeway. Granted, Saito's not exactly a customer, but, yeah, well, Jessica's just coming out with it, I suppose. You know, she knows for certain that, you know, you're not lovers, you're not siblings, and Louise is probably an aristocrat. Which, you know, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to deduce that, given by Louise's overall demeanor and how, you know, she doesn't really have the skills that would make a waitress. Some skills would be fairly foundational, you know, unless you have a bunch of servants. So Saito, perhaps to the detriment of everyone involved here, he's alluding to the fact that he has a mission here, and that, he's not a servant per se, but, you shouldn't get involved with us for your own safety. Like, I get the impulse to do that, but, oh dear, Jessica has his number. She knows exactly how to get him to spill the beans. The question is, what's her motive here? Is it purely just interest in what's going on, or, is she, an agent of, I don't know, people who have ill intentions for the kingdom? Kinda hard to say, but, oh dear. So, I get it. I get why Louise is unhappy, but I feel like that might be slightly uncalled for. Ooh. So even Louise can't really keep her lies straight anymore. So it seems like Jessica might be kind of taking Louise's side in a weird sort of way. At least that's how it seems to me. She's angling towards, offering help. If only because she's interested in Saito and what's going on, then, yeah, here we go. She's saying like, oh yeah, you wouldn't have any trouble winning the tip race, would you? And Louise says she wouldn't, but, I reckon she's not really gotten anything, and she hasn't really been doing much in the way of actual work. Oh, here we go. So unfortunately, a great big fat nobleman has entered with a group of retainers. And if I had to guess, this guy is the culprit. This is the guy Princess Henrietta is worried about for treating peasants poorly, and if he's going to treat anyone in particular poorly, it's liable to be Louise. I mean, fortunately, he might tip well, I suppose. Well, no, that's probably not true. He doesn't seem to be the type to tip graciously, but I don't know, perhaps Louise might manage to get a significant sum of money out of him just by virtue of, well, good luck, I guess, I don't know. Because the guy doesn't seem to be the type to willingly give money away. So Jessica is giving us the deep lore. This guy is an agent of the crown who collects tax, and he has a reputation for essentially just like taxing people arbitrarily if they displease him. And more to the point, he has a tendency not to pay or tip. So, I was thinking this would be the key to Louise winning, but it's sort of the exact opposite. She's showed up when it would be better to avoid him, and, her physical appearance is not exactly ingratiating him. Oh dear. Louise is gonna, beat this guy over the head. And to be fair, it is kinda warranted, but, oh dear. I fear she's just earned a whole bunch of trouble for the boss. So fortunately, now that things are sort of devolving into violence, this is where Saito can at least shine, Because, with someone attacking his master, he can at least, whip out a sword and get down to business, At the very least, he can fall back on the idea that he's here on orders from the crown. Alright, there we go. There's a nice little bit of subtext, the only one who can touch Louise is me, says Saito. He says that in reference to people, saying they want to hit Louise. And, if I were Louise, I wouldn't exactly blush at the thought of that, but, I can appreciate that she appreciates the sentiment. Unfortunately for Saito, he has miscalculated. His sword is up in the attic, and therefore, he can't really do much at the present. So there we go, Louise has planned ahead. She brought her wand, what good it does her, Although I suppose really just creating a gigantic explosion is kind of the order of the day when you're surrounded. Now, it's interesting that just, this appearance of having a wand and being aristocratic in nature is enough to sort of, have this guy turn tail. Well, I take that back slightly. It looked like he was gonna run, but it's really the invocation of the letter from the princess that sort of got him to run away. So, yeah, there we have it. He's essentially groveling, saying, here, take this money and, pretend nothing happened. So, I guess in a weird sort of way, Louise may leverage this to win the tip race. It's not a tip, strictly speaking. Certainly not for good service, but I guess despite nearly ruining this business, she did ultimately save it. I mean, the boss, he would be, I think he would be just in giving Louise a little help here, giving her that garment. Yeah, there you go. So Jessica's kind of like putting her finger on the scale here. The customers left it behind, so that must make it a tip. Not exactly honest, but neither was the patron, so I guess it kind of works out. So the question is, what's Louise gonna do with the garment? It's remarkably skimpy, as is all the other garments, and it's really only good for making money, but she's claiming she only borrowed it because they let her and it would be a waste not to. But really, she's only wearing it for Saito, which, it makes you wonder. Like, she even says, like, hey, I'm wearing it for you, say something. You would think she would try and earn money with it, but, I guess there are some things more valuable than money. Now, interestingly, we cut to Miss Longville here, the former thief. Naturally, she's in prison, but it seems as though there are shady people who have sway here. They're freeing her. Very interesting indeed. It seems as though the princess is right. There is some real nasty business going on. Unfortunately, I don't think she knows quite the extent of it. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.